Probably aliens. Okay, so there we go. Oh, skipped too far. So it's a very blurry image of bars. You know, there's potlucks that become sort of they're family traditions. They're just part of our experience. I love this image. Butter sculpture. If you guys haven't seen it, it's amazing. And they always do the Queens of the Milky Way. So this is a real person. The Queen of the Milky Way gets her head sculpted in butter. So I never became the Queen of the Milky Way, but ooh, that's a bad slide. But the reason why I'm showing you this here is because, so I graduated from a small liberal arts school in Minnesota, and I got a degree in, well, it's a liberal arts degree, but it's in studio art, right? And for 5 years after finishing my degree, I worked at a sculpture park in northeastern Minnesota, right on the Wisconsin border. And it was a place for emerging and established artists to come and do a residency or an internship and build large-scale outdoor sculpture. So I have sort of an expertise, if you will. I'm not that old, but I have sort of an expertise in large-scale outdoor sculpture, and I also work in public art currently. So this is sort of my background. This is the giant pink forklift that we had out there. It was pretty cool, and it had a flying pig on the back. But so the reason why I put these slides in here is just that was one of the sculptures that I made while I was there. But the reason why I put these slides in there is because this work came out of an internship that I did when I was an undergraduate. And this work really, really informed all of the knowledge that I have today. How to make things, how to write grants, how to build networks. So, you know, there was international, national, and local artists coming into this residency program, and I have fostered those relationships and done other things, including come to see you Boulder because of that, right? That's sort of why I'm in Colorado today is all of the relationships that I have built through my creative community that came out of the sculpture park. And now, of course, it's getting, you know, it's sort of morphing because I live here. So it was a really fun place to work. I learned a lot about rigging and the engineering behind large-scale sculpture. So yeah, that's been really fun. So and in undergrad, did I know that was the route I was going to go? Not necessarily. And you know, Gwen and Ash, you guys hear me talk in class that you need to make sure that you have your doors open, right? That you're not sort of just going the one path. That you might have some other things that come your way that really turn out to be the right thing for you. So yeah, so that was that experience. So now I'm going to jump into my creative practice to give you guys sort of a sense of what I do as a visual artist. And then I'm hoping I'll have some time where we can ask questions, because I really want to be able to be a resource for you guys. You know, if you haven't had me in class, or you won't have me in class, I have spent a lot of time helping other artists look for residencies and grants and you know, scholarships and internships. So I want to be able to be a resource for you guys too, especially during this wayfinding opportunity. But I'm gonna briefly give you an overview of my creative practice. So, like I said, I'm thinking about mixed identity. I'm thinking about relational identity, and this comes from sort of my own personal experience and an interest in wanting to recombine memory, tradition, and place, and to sort of tell these new stories. And so, oops, gotta sync up here. So I do a lot of research before making some of my sculptural work, or before embarking on a creative project. And there's some Aztec mythology that keeps coming up in my practice, and it will sort of go full circle, and I'll end with another project that's been influenced by this Aztec mythology. But I'm going to briefly give you this introduction because I think it's going to help you to understand mixed identity and how that plays into my my practice. So this here is a stone that's representing, and it is in Mexico City today. It still exists. It's a giant stone that represents Coyolxauhqui, who was an Aztec goddess that tried to kill her mother, Coatlicue, after her mother was impregnated by a feather. So Koyoshuki wanted to kill her mother, and she also has like already like 70 or 100 sisters and brothers. Like it's a crazy family dynamic. So she wants to kill her mother, and her brother was like, no, and he tosses her over a mountain. He might have cut her up first. I can't remember if he cuts her up and tosses her, or if he tosses her and that makes her cut up. But she like falls down the sacred mountain and is in a million pieces, right? Tragic story, but the mother survived, okay? So, like I said, complicated family dynamics, and we'll get into that a little bit more. But this Aztec story was introduced to me by a woman named Gloria Anzaldúa, who's a Chicana scholar. She is an activist writer who grew up in Texas. Her parent, and along the border, not far from where my father and my family live. But she writes about this experience of having mixed identity as being someone who lived in the borderlands, being both an immigrant and an American, like thinking about this sort of mixed identity, right? Having Spanish and English spoken in the home. And she talks about this psychological, spiritual, physical experience of being in a in-between space, of having mixed identity. And she talks about it, she sort of talks about Koyoshuki, she calls it the Koyoshuki imperative, because it's a process of emotional and physical dismemberment. So Anzaldúa sort of flips it on its head. Like, we think of dismemberment as being awful and traumatic, but what she's saying is that when we have mixed identity, we are living in that state of dismemberment, and let's figure out how we can put those pieces together to understand that mixed identity, right? So I look to her work a lot. Oops, I almost tried to flip my computer. Here's some just images from her text where she talks about mixed heritage, multicultures, this sort of ID crisis that you come into when you have mixed identity. And so I like to show, so I just showed you the Aztec mythology, right? And we're going to get into this, like I said, a little bit more, but both sides of my family are devout Catholics. And it's something that has come into my practice a lot recently when I'm thinking about my ancestors and their religion and what came before Catholicism. So yeah, just to tie that in, that's sort of where my religious connections are. I don't know that much about Aztec beliefs, but I have been sort of researching that, being interested in Gloria Anzaldúa's writing. So I'm going to show you a few projects. I'm actually going to skip ahead. So a lot of my work, I'm recombining, right, or sort of translating things that are objects, materials, family traditions, our cultural history, our landscapes, and so there we go. So does anyone know what these are? Yeah, and they're really common in southern New Mexico. And actually, I was talking to a friend of mine. There's sort of a feud between northern New Mexicans and southern New Mexicans, what these are called. But we call them luminaria, and we always lit them at Christmas time. This is, my family's big into quilting, my mother's side. This is a 1945 Jeep Willys that never made it to the war, but it was, built for World War II. And my father and I drive around in this in the Robledo Mountains, and it's like become part of our family. We call him Uncle Willie, and he will he comes up over and over again in my work. But it's partially because we use this vehicle as sort of a way to explore the landscape around the place that we live. But there's a funny story about this. So it's like this tan-colored Jeep, right? And my dad repaints it every couple of years. Well, one year, this is my grandma's porch. It's actually not his house, but this is my grandma's porch. And my grandma and I walked out after he painted it, and we were like, you painted the Jeep pink. And he's a little bit colorblind. And he was like, what? No. And it was like this sort of tan pink color. So he was like, well, it's Desert Rose. And that's where the title. So you'll see like these personal stories, family memories come into my work. So you sort of learn more about my work if you can hear me talk about it, but I hope that there's also sort of a larger connection to the work, even if you don't hear some of these stories. And the other thing that I'm doing a lot is looking at other artists. And I think this is something that we talk about in my classes too. I think people are afraid, like, well, isn't that copying, or that's not an original idea, right? Well, there's lots of people for generations who have been saying, Mark Twain, I think, was even saying when he was writing that there are no original ideas, right? We're all sort of riffing off of each other or remixing each other's ideas, recombining things, right? So I talk to my students a lot about that, trying to understand sort of the lineage that you're coming from, or understand, who came before, like what are you in conversation with, right? So I wanted to show you some images of artists that I look at. So this is David Hammond. He is an African-American artist and works a lot with objects, mostly objects and materials that are, that talk about Black culture, right? And so and also urban culture. He made this beautiful object that's sort of a hybrid object of a basketball hoop and a chandelier, right? This one, actually, if some of you guys went to any of you who are first years or in seminar right now, and you went to the Denver Art Museum, did you see that big glass chandelier in the 4th floor, maybe? So that's Fred Wilson's work. And also talking about identity and place. The one that's at the Denver Art Museum, it was combining Islamic forms with that Italian form, right? This is Ai Weiwei. So there's artists who are working, contemporary artists who I'm looking at all the time, and seeing how I want to be in conversation with them, understanding what conversations and stories they're already telling, right? Because you don't want to reinvent the wheel, right? And then this is the sculpture that I made after thinking about those things. So it's got the color of my dad's Desert Roads Jeep. It's got the luminaria on it, and I've built this forged steel chandelier to sort of talk again about like elevating the traditions that I've been a part of as someone who grew up in southern New Mexico, as someone whose parents have taught me how to make things, right? So this is the work that came out of that, and those are slip cast porcelain paper bags, and then they have some coal in them, and then here's a textile piece that was shown along there. So oftentimes you'll also see my work that's sort of in conversation with each other. So I'm trying to be in conversation with other artists, with my personal experience, and the objects themselves have conversations with one another. And actually, I'm going to just keep going. So this is another project that I made more based off of my growing up in Minnesota. Who's from the Midwest here? Toby? Okay, a few of you. You've probably seen these, right? If you have ever even driven through the Midwest. And actually, sometimes you see them out here on the plains. But it's a deer blind, right? It's an elevated deer blind for deer hunting. And deer hunting is very much a part of my family. That's my uncle and cousin and his boys. That's my cousin's first buck. And I grew up hunting both at my dad's side and my mom's side, and it was a place, when we would go sit in the deer blinds with my cousins or my friends, it was a place for waiting for, an animal to cross, but it was also a place, sort of a coming of age site, right? Like we talked about all kinds of things. We got up really early and complained about how early we were up, but then had a really good time out in the cold in this deer stand. So I was interested in this object, and also interested in these places that I had come of age in. And so I've just got some landscape images, and again, looking at other artists that are making this kind of work. So here's an installation that Mark Dion did in London. I think it was at Whitechapel, early 2000s. And so then I decided that I also wanted to make a sculpture with that form, but I wanted to shift it, right? And sort of think again about making a hybrid object. So this is an elevated deer blind that's built in the traditional, I use the dimensions of a traditional deer blind, but the one that I made, because I really wanted to focus on the experience of the landscape in the thing rather than having it be for scoping out prey. So I put it on top of steel rockers so that when you were inside of it, the horizon line was shifting, and that was where your focus would be. So that was a pretty fun project. Really way more uncomfortable to be in there than I had anticipated. So, yeah, it was actually kind of terrifying. So then this one, again, like thinking about traditions that I'm sort of recombining. This is, every year we have a piñata. This is my 3rd birthday. Oh, and today is my birthday. And it's Gloria Anzaldua's birthday. So, pretty. And your daughter's birthday? All right, Libras. So these are just different piñatas throughout the year. That was from my 30th birthday a few years back. So it's ongoing, right? I even had a piñata at my baby shower. But so also thinking about hunting, right? And the way that we sort of display our trophies and our mounts. And so this was sort of a funny spin-off of those different traditions. And so this is a donkey hide that I had traced and then applied the piñata material and technique to it so that it's sort of a goofy mount, right? This is a piece of work that I did after being invited to create something, an installation or a sculpture for the Natural History Museum at CU Boulder. And so what we did was I would meet with all of the different collections managers, so zoology, paleontology, entomology, just to see what collections they had and what was available to me. Oh, this is a video. I'm going to wait for a second. But what I was like, oh, I've never really thought about my work intersecting with science. So like, what do I do, you know? And as I was going through these different collections, on all of these, they write, like, you know, when the thing was found, by who, and there's actually a lot of subjectivity that goes into it. Because it'll say like an approximate time or an approximate location, or maybe someone didn't file it right away and they file it later and they're like, you know, they don't write the actual date. So I was just thinking about how I always perceive science to be so true and factual, right? But it actually does have a lot of like sort of human touch into the research part of it. And then I thought about these things as sort of being, what do I collect, right? How can I relate to these things? And I collect memories, and so I was interested in how to show those memories in using the methods that a natural history museum does to sort of emphasize that collecting. Maybe it didn't play. Okay. So again, this is my dad's barn, and so I decided that. And this is a video, and maybe I moved the video. I'm sorry, you guys, but this is the only home video that I have, and it's from the 1991, the summer of 1991, in New Mexico in my father's backyard. And so I picked this summer to sort of display, to create a natural history museum display of my memories from that particular summer, because I have sort of mixed memories about it because I have this video that I've been able to reference. So there's sort of some of the backyard, and what I did is I combined, I'll see here. So I've got different things the objects that are part of the memories that happened during that summer, and it includes this mulberry tree, and that's going to come up in another project that is in my dad's backyard that we would always cut down the branches from and make forts out of. We've got up here, there's a rattlesnake. That summer my dad had to shoot a rattlesnake that was in our dog house, which was pretty terrifying. And then there's also these June bugs, because there's another memory of us playing with the June bugs. So I wanted to figure out a way that I could show these memories like the Natural History Museum shows, you know, their artifacts. So I created a sort of hybrid fireplace mantle, vitrine museum display thing. So, because I was thinking, where do we put our memories, right? And we put them on fireplace mantles sometimes, right? You have your pictures and your accolades and your trophies and all those sorts of things. So, what's under this vitrine, like I said, is the mulberry. It didn't play. Let's see if this one will play. Oh no, they're not playing. Okay, well, you guys don't get to see me stringing a June bug up and spinning it around. I don't know if any of you guys have ever done that, but it was something that we did a lot when we were growing up. So there's some little videos alongside these artifacts that sort of, again, showed like that personal touch that's coming in there. So this is a project that I did to really try and focus on Anzaldua's ideas about mixed identity. And there's this poem that she wrote about being in the in-between space. And this is a section of that poem. And I specifically was focusing on this line of the poem, which says, "This is my home, this thin edge of barbed wire." And the reason why I focused in on that is I think it just like perfectly captures the description of what it's like to live in an in-between space, or an in-between like mental space, physical space, etc. So I couldn't have thought of a more perfect way to say it, and so I wanted to make a project based off of those lines. And so what I did, and this is also combining the craft of my parents. So my father is a gunsmith. He was trained as a gunsmith. My mother is a quilter. And I wanted to figure out how to use those crafts and those traditions to create new ways of making marks that talked about this mixed identity or this in-between place. And so I worked with my dad to refit a 16-gauge shotgun so that I could use it as a mark-making tool. And so I have this steel template or stencil, essentially, that I cut out, and it has part of Gloria Anzaldua's line in there. It says, "This thin edge of barbed wire." And that the shotgun is essentially a sandblaster. It's acting as a sandblaster to carve into the stone. So it's a long process. I should have put the picture in here of my bruised arm after, because it really did take a long time to get the carving right. But this is the shotgun that I used, and it's got some of the flora from the surrounding region in the Chihuahuan Desert. It's creosote bush on there primarily. And then this is the whole project. So I showed an image of the rock, because the rock was extremely heavy and could not move it. But I showed the image of the rock, the shotgun, and then this sort of, talk about wayfinding. This is an inverted, like landmark, right? And so I'm thinking about how to orient myself physically and mentally and spiritually in this in-between space. There's just some more of that project. And I'm going to finish up the presentation of my creative work with my most recent project, and then I think I'll have a few minutes for questions right at the end. So this was an opportunity to dive back into that Aztec mythology. So remember, Coyolxauhqui is the one who tried to kill her mother, but was tossed over the sacred mountain and split into a million pieces, right? So I had made work about that, thought about that a long time. But then I was like, okay, I haven't really learned about the mother, right? Coatlicue, very much. And so I started to do a little bit more research. And this is Coatlicue. She's like the matron goddess. And then I was like, okay, so what happened between the time of Aztec mythology and the Catholicism? Like, what happened there, right? Like, how did indigenous people become Catholics in what is now present-day Mexico City? Like, how does that happen? So I was thinking about that, and I was also recognizing the similarities between Coatlicue, the Aztec goddess, and the Virgin Mary, specifically the Virgin of Guadalupe, who's sort of if you have been in any Latin community, she's like the patron, she's like the mascot, right? People have tattoos and T-shirts and bumper stickers and, I mean, pins. I've got a pin on my bag. But so I was thinking about the similarity between these two figures, these two really important female figures in these different traditions, and trying to understand what was going on here. And there's one theory which I subscribe to. Does anyone know the Virgin of Guadalupe story a little bit? So I'll make a long story very short. And essentially, actually, let's go to this picture. Okay, so Juan Diego was a indigenous boy living in this region, which is now present-day Mexico City, and he was walking home from the town, the village, one day, and the Virgin appeared to him, and she said, "Juan Diego, I want you to build me a temple." And he was like, "I don't know what you are or who you are, but I'm gonna go." And she's like, "Meet me here again." And so he left, and he's like, I don't want to see her again. This is freaky. He ran into her again the next day, and she's like, Juan Diego, what happened? You didn't talk to your priest about building me a temple. And he's like, I can't. I've got a lot going on. And then he's like, she says, meet me here the next day, or in a week or something like that. No, she said the next day. And he goes home. His uncle gets really sick, so he can't go meet the Virgin. And of course, the Virgin's disappointed, and she's like a very powerful spiritual being, so that was bad for him to do. But she runs into him when he does finally, a few days later, go back home from the village and crosses that spot again, and she's like, Juan Diego, why didn't you start building me a temple? And he was like, I can't, like, no one's gonna believe me, you're a ghost or, you know, a spirit, and everyone's gonna think I'm crazy. And so what she does, she gives him this cloak, and the cloak has colors, and when he opens it, it has these roses that are not native to the region. So it is like this miraculous moment, right? And it's also the moment where indigenous people are like overwhelmingly converted to Catholicism, right? And there's a theory, this is the one that I subscribe to, that the Virgin was created to sort of overshadow Coatlicue, right? And she is the way, she's sort of the villain of indigenous people losing their own belief system, right? But it's a complicated relation. I have a complicated relationship with her because I also understand like her spiritual power. My grandmother is extremely. That's not going to. I don't know why these videos aren't working. My grandma is an extremely devout Catholic and would travel to different sites where the Virgin had appeared. And, you know, I admire my grandmother's devotion to her faith. And I always say one project, if I can get enough time to work on a long-term project, is to teach myself to believe in God again. Because it's been a while, but I'm sort of really constantly inspired by my grandmother's beliefs. But so, okay, that happened, right? So there's the Virgin, okay? And also, oh wait, let me back up one quick story. So this is the mulberry tree that you saw in the Natural History Museum display, right? So this mulberry tree, it was after this. So this is 91. It was probably like 97 or 98. My grandmother started to see the Virgin Mary in the mulberry tree. And she'd be like, the Virgin is here, the Virgin is here. And we're like, yeah, I don't see it. And she'd be like, oh, you stupid. And she would like get mad at us. And then she started to keep a disposable camera in the drawer so that we could take the pictures because she couldn't take the pictures. So we had to grab the camera, go take the pictures, which you didn't know where you were shooting. You're like, I don't know. And then, but then she could show those pictures to her sisters and whatever. And I still have a bunch of the pictures, and I don't see the Virgin, but I am really grateful that my grandmother could. And this tree is now in this is my dad's yard now. And it's also like this thing that keeps overgrowing on top of his Jeep. And he has to constantly like cut the branches back, but he can't cut the tree down because the Virgin appears in it. So it's like this really interesting like sort of member of our family. So again, personal memories, personal family stories are coming into my work in ways that the viewer might not understand, but I hope that there are some like larger connections that are happening that might intrigue you enough to understand those stories a little deeper. So the other thing that my grandmother used to see, there's the Virgin, but also in, I'm forgetting, July of 40, oh gosh, I should remember this date. Anyway, my grandmother grew up in Hatch, New Mexico on a farm, and her sisters were outside, 1941? No, that can't be right. Anyway, okay, I have to get the date correct, but she and her siblings were outside and they saw this, right? They saw this in the distance. And they had no idea what it was. They were like, that's crazy. I mean, there are some military facilities around. Like, is that what's going on? July 16th, 1945. Is that what it is? Nobody knows. Nobody told anybody anything, right? But what it was the atomic bomb test, okay? So this is the atomic bomb. This is Trinity test site where it went off. Which is really weird that it's called Trinity, like the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Like there's like this weird spiritual connection, and so I was thinking about that. But anyway, and this is a whole nother body of work that I'd be interested in making more work about, because, or another event that I'd be more interested in making work about, because lots of people are continuing to be affected by that explosion. My grandparents, my family was far enough away, but people who live in like the Alamogordo region or closer to it have cancer. Like there's all kinds of impacts from this. And the government didn't tell anybody until like decades later that this happened. Crazy, right? So anyway, I was thinking about the things my grandma saw. I was thinking about our relationship to the land and our spiritual beliefs, and I decided that I wanted to make some work about that. So again, the Hail Mary is coming back in here. So this work is part of an exhibition called The Spirit and the Flame, and it's got I'm making references to my grandmother seeing the Virgin in the Mulberry Tree. There's some pieces of the Mulberry Tree. There's some pieces of trinitite in here, and that is when the bomb exploded, it turned the sand particles to glass. And there's pieces of this, it's called trinitite or atomic glass, or there's different names for it. But there's pieces of it all on the floor of the Trinity test site, which is actually technically you're not allowed to take it anymore. So it's contraband or something. But that's what this work is about. And so I've got the Virgin here, and if you are facing it right on, it's hard to get in a photo, but you sort of become the Virgin because you're looking in this mirror, right? And I'm hoping that through some of the other narratives that are going on in the work, that the story is being told that the Virgin is a complex figure, and you can see yourself in her. And she's a sort of a colonizer and a symbol of some pretty intense belief systems in my community and beyond. So that was sort of the most recent body of work. If you go over to the exhibition in the Rotunda Gallery, you can see this one in person. So there's the Virgin. And then this one is in the faculty exhibition. And that's a piece of the Mulberry Tree. Literally every year we have to cut off chunks that are more than that big because it grows so fast. So thank you all for joining me in this conversation today. And I apologize for sort of speeding through things, but I wanted to get through all the content and hopefully have a few minutes to answer any questions if you have any. And also, you can, my email's available on, I think if you just search Carissa, it's like the only one that pops up. So if you have any questions or want tips on like internships or jobs, I have a whole spreadsheet. I was going to show an image of that, but I was like, no, it's embarrassing. So, but I have a spreadsheet of things that people might be interested in as young creatives going into the field. So yeah, thanks for coming, you guys.
Yeah, thank you, Carissa. I know some of you have to get to class, so we'll wrap it up, actually, but if you want to stick around, Carissa will be here to answer those questions, maybe. Before you leave, the only thing I just want to remind you guys is that, I'm not in front of the camera very often, is that next week, same time, same place, we're going to be here. New Genres Collective is going to be speaking, and for those of you who don't know, that's actually a collective of current students as well as alumni. And so the alumni, 3 different alumni will be here talking about that project. Come support your future selves, which will be alumni as well, and the other students that are involved with it. So thank you again, Carissa. All right.